Today, I'm going to give you some ideas of what you should think about when you are thinking about writing a journal paper on your research. Now, there's a lot that one can include in such a talk. This is what I think is important. You can go onto YouTube or onto the internet or anything, and they might slant the content a little bit differently. But this is what I think is important, and feel free to listen to me. There we go. Now, why is your scientific contribution important for the rest of the world to hear about? It is important because of what I call the research loop. Before you do research, you go to the literature and see what's done before, and that will guide you then in your research project. You then publish your research, and this goes back into the cycle to become part of the literature which others will review prior to them doing research. So that is why it is so important. So previous research becomes the basis for your own research. You add value to the consumer-producer cycle, consumer and producer cycle, the research loop. Now, the growth of science is very reliant on how well you communicate your research results. So please make sure that your results are clear and brief and lucidly communicated to facilitate this growth process. Because you might be doing Nobel Prize work, but if nobody can understand what you've written, nobody will actually use it. So that is why your scientific contribution is important, to give your own research that causes the basis of other people's research, and it must be clear. Now, the goals of an original research article are scientific and real. So you must clearly describe your work and findings. It assists to further scientific knowledge and improve the state of the art in the field that you're working, and it contributes towards current scientific evidence. The real goals of original research are to firstly justify your academic existence. This is what you've done. This is what you've used taxpayers' money for. Look what I've accomplished. You can get research results on the basis of publication and your research. You can get promotion, whether it's in academia or not. It enriches your CV. It'll impress your friends and your enemies, of course. And it also adds to your personal marketability and global mobility when it comes to the new world in which we live in. You guys have opportunities globally which were not available to previous generations. So your role in the research process, just to repeat, be aware of the contribution to your science and ensure it's shared with others. But you also have an ethical responsibility to the taxpayer to communicate your results, because taxes have actually gone to subsidize your education. So you do need to give back. How does the publishing process begin? You have a question. You do preliminary research, which is the literature review. The answer can either be yes, it's been done, answers the question, or else not yes. The question either hasn't been answered, or else it's partly been answered. So you go and do your new research, design a project, do the lab, results, conclusions, and you get a manuscript. This is then published and disseminated, and of course, goes back into the literature. But in most cases, for postgraduates, the dissertation is inextricably linked to the publication process. So there might be your dissertation somewhere along the line, which you publish from. Now, scientific papers are highly structured and highly stylized. And because of their structure and their layout, Readers must be able to find what they want to find, where they expect to find it. If they don't find that, well, then they get cross and they won't continue reading. So as you can see, the structure here is virtually identical to the structure of your dissertational thesis, but there are a couple of differences, and I'm going to highlight those differences. The first difference, well, not actually so much of a difference, because you do have dissertation style guides for your dissertation. But the instructions to authors when it comes to a journal selection is dependent on whether they accept it or not. You might have the most beautiful research, but if it's not done in the format that they want, they will send it straight back to you. They also have set submission procedures, so you can't just send them an email and attach your manuscript as an attachment and say, this is fabulous work, please publish it in your next volume, because that doesn't work. You most probably have to submit it online. Journal selection. Now, one can talk for a whole hour on journal selection, but briefly, ensure your paper fits within the scope of the journal. Assess the credentials of the publisher, and this is extremely important when it comes to predatory journals. Very often they seek you to submit your manuscript, but you'll have to pay a hefty sum of money, and the paper will not even be peer reviewed. And you're lucky if it does appear somewhere, because they just very often take the money and run. And also remember to submit your research to one journal only at a time. Of course, if your paper gets rejected, you can submit it to another journal, but it is extremely unethical to submit your research to 4 different journals in one fell swoop. Okay, now we get to the title. The title is important because it should inform about the manuscript content. It should be unambiguous, informative, brief, specific. And don't use empty words like investigation into platinum-based alloys. If you are doing creep rate of platinum-based alloys, say it's creep rate that you're doing. Now, why is the title important? It's because that's one of the first stops where you information retrieval services pick up. So when you put in search terms, the title is something that will pick up at once. So it has to be quite explicit. And the more accurate and concise, the better. If you can make your title interesting, it'll be an added bonus. Nowadays, you can do interesting, quirky things. Like you could actually say, for instance, creep or creepy, unusual creep rate of platinum-based alloys at high temperatures and high magnesium levels or something like that. In the olden days, it was absolutely non-new to do it. We had to be serious, but now to get people's attention, it is an added bonus. The author's names and affiliations must be added. Now, can I just give you a hint? Use the same name to avoid confusion in the scientific community. Use your surname and all initials. If you're going to be J. Smith, there are millions of J. Smiths around. Make it JM or JX Smith, depending on what your initials are, to ensure that at least people can link your name with a field of research. And ladies too, understand that if you get married and start publishing under your married surname, all your previous research will be lost because people will not be able to link your maiden name to your married name and realize it's the same person. So when people actually look for references and you say, my name is whatever, 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 they will not pick up the research you've done under your maiden name. So make sure your name is reliable and you use it throughout your academic writing and publishing career. The affiliations, you need to give the complete names and addresses of the centers and institutions to which the authors belong, or you as an author, and identify a corresponding author who will be the person who people will ask questions of, so the email address will be there. Keywords also a foundation of retrieval, very important as well, as important as your title. Use meaningful and not empty words like investigation when you're actually doing creep rate. You can use free text such as roughness and strength. You can add product names to it. Generally don't use generalities. If you're going to talk about Condy's crystals, I don't know if people outside of South Africa know what Condy's crystals are and that it's potassium permanganate, just a silly thing. And you can get various descriptors, the sources, as you can see from these two source databases. Now, the next thing people are going to look at when they are searching is the abstract. So make sure it is it reflects your manuscript content. Make sure it fulfills the expectations of the reader and that it covers the information of your study, the main aspects, the critical methodology, and the results. If the abstract is given, it has to be between 200 and 300 words. Never submit an abstract of 100 words. Use all the space available. Blow your own trumpet. Characteristics of an abstract is it has a content and a format. The content must be brief, concise, informative, and condensed. Use short sentences, but not telegraphed sentences where you leave out ands and buts and so on. No references or tables go into the abstract. No acronyms or abbreviations, but I do see nowadays it does happen. No excessive detail. Remember, your abstract is your message to the world. So make sure the message is there and clear. The format, it might be structured, which means it wants the abstract has to be under headings, introduction, methods, results, conclusion. It can either be structured where it has to be under each heading and a few sentences under the heading, or in a single paragraph and the headings run and are boldened in that single paragraph. So your publication is your entry into the scientific global arena. Make sure you have a reliable name, which people will recognize, and make the best impression possible with the title, keywords, and abstract, because these are the first things which come up. And on the basis of that, people and readers will decide whether they will download your paper or not. So make the best impression possible. Okay, onto the paper. The introduction must be brief. Focus it on the problem because it lays the foundation of your study and is the reason why you're undertaking your study. Some journals want most of the references within the introduction, but that depends on the journal style. So read the instructions to authors very carefully. It is not necessary to repeat established facts. You can just reference those established facts if need be. The aims and the objectives must be clearly stated in a separate sentence at the end of the section, or even in point form if secondary aims are to be examined as well. But don't make the reader hunt for why you are doing the study and how you're going to do it. Now, the validity of your results depends on your methods and your materials. So make sure your methods are sufficient to allow anyone to reproduce the study. Be explicit about samples and sampling, the materials used, names, batch numbers, and so on. Instrumentation. If one of your instruments requires calibration, make sure that you mention something like that in your methods, just to know that people know that the instrument was working at optimum level. Statistical methods. Give the packages and the software and very often the version of your statistical package. If your sample comes from a certain geographic area, which is known for its impurities or its purity or whatever, include that. So these would be unique features of your investigation. And your equations and units must be in internationally acceptable units and nomenclature. When it comes to your results section, you can relate this in a logical sequence, either by method or else importance. It's up to you to decide. If you've got many different methods, don't hop from one method to the next and then back to the first and so on. Be sure that your results are presented to show that your aims and objectives were met or not. You don't have to say whether it was met or not, because that comes in the discussion, but just feature them so they are met or not. Don't remove results which contradict your hypothesis, because that is actually unethical. But you can omit superfluous results. Let's just say that you got some fantastic results. As you were gathering the data, it was very interesting, and it wasn't in the aims and objectives, but you want to shove it into your paper at any rate. Please don't do that. You can always do another paper using those results, but don't put them into your original paper, because it's going to blur what you want to do. And don't repeat detail which is present in the table headings or figure captions, text. In your discussion, it's important to say, what do the results mean? How your results compare with other studies, and how your results add to other studies. Don't repeat presented results. So often I find in a discussion, the results are just repeated, cut and pasted from the results section into the discussion. That's not how it works. Give your study limitations and strengths, and in your conclusions, link that to your aims and objectives of the study. Acknowledgments. When it comes to publications, they want fairly extensive acknowledgments. So check once again in your instructions to authors. They are particularly interested in conflicts of interests and grants. If, say, you have got a grant to do a piece of research from a certain manufacturer, and your results show extremely favorable results for that manufacturer, then at once red flags are raised. Give the names of everybody who's helped you, whether there's a statistician. Say whether this is part of a larger project or not. They might require for you to state whether this is part of a higher degree or not. And they also want to know perhaps about oral presentations, just in case the abstract ends up in a conference presentation proceedings. Citations, references can be in Harvard style or in Vancouver style. Harvard style, you've got the name in brackets and the year. Vancouver style, superscript, very often little numbers, listing your references in the sequence in which they appear in text. Check once again with the instructions to author whether they want these comma, difference in comma, or whether they want square brackets there. Journals get into a frothy if you don't do the references correctly. Tables. A table consists of the content, which is the lines, or the stuff you put into it, the heading, the table heading, and perhaps a footnote. Please make sure that they're simple and not too crowded. Avoid separating your boxes using heavy lines and backgrounds, and don't shade those boxes. Always put the units of measure in a heading. As I said before, don't repeat the table information in the text headings. Tables with 3 rows or less, and columns and rows is an absolute waste of space. You can say that quicker in the text, and only use essential footnotes when it comes to tables. The same thing goes for figures when it comes to using footnotes. Only essential stuff in the figures. A figure consists of a caption, the legend, and the content, be that a graph or a micrograph. Figure shows tendencies and relationships rather than data. So if you want to focus your reader on specific data, rather use a table rather than a figure, because it's difficult to read very often when it comes to graphs. Graphs and bar charts, once again, avoid heavy grid lines, label the axes correctly. The legend of the graph or bar graph should not obscure the data. When it comes to micrographs, have a scale bar, and also if you're going to put arrows on there, make sure the arrows don't obstruct the features of your micrograph. So to end, these are my ideas of what I think you should be thinking about when you are thinking about writing a paper. But I want to end with this quote from Nature. And it says, to be accepted by referees and cited by readers, papers must do more than simply present a chronological account of the research work. Rather, they must convince their audience that the research presented is important, valid, and relevant to other scientists in the same field. And what this actually means is, you Me Too research, where you're doing the same sort of thing, but you're just using a different material, and it's not going to add much value. People get bored with that. So this is why they continue. To this end, they must emphasize both the motivation for the work and the outcome of it. And they must include just enough evidence to establish the validity of this outcome. Thank you.